Hey guys, what's up? It's ggDoA, and I'm back. I'm excited too because there's a new set of Hearthstone cards coming out, a new adventure, One Night in Karazhan, which sounds like the title to like a Warcraft fanfiction romance novel, but luckily it's not. Luckily, it's just the new Hearthstone adventure. So we're going to take a look at the cards that have already been released. Basically, the first 2 days since they announced the adventure, they've shown us some cards, and so we'll just take a quick look at them. And this video is just to give you my first impressions of the cards, and just so I can watch back later and see how wrong I am about everything. But we'll see how I do. We'll see how I do in the end. All right, let's check out the Beast minion that came out. A 1 for a 2/2 Enchanted Raven. That's really good right off the bat, right? I mean, a 2/2 for 1 mana. Very, very strong in Hearthstone. And if you wanted to build like a mid-range zoo-style druid deck, I think this is going to be a key card for it. And I think that's a kind of deck that Blizzard has wanted players to build for a long time, and players have wanted to build for a long time. And this kind of nicely fills out your curve. If you have like this and Living Roots in your deck, you have a pretty good chance of getting some sort of board presence on the board your first turn, even if you start without the coins. So yeah, I'm excited about it. I'm definitely going to play around with it, and I don't know, there's not much more to say about it. 1 mana for a 2/2 beast. It's good stuff. Let's move on. A rogue card. 5 for a 5/6 Ethereal Peddler. Battlecry, reduce the cost of cards in your hand from other classes. So it reduces it by 2. So this is a little bit odd. As far as I know, I think right now Burgle is the only way you can get cards from other classes. I guess Nefarian is another one, another way to do that. But as far as like rogue spells go, Burgle is really it. So, you know, I mean, 5 for a 5/6 is good stats for the mana, I suppose. And if you're running Burgle, maybe you'd run one of these guys, but I don't know. Speaking competitively, and when I do these videos, I kind of want to speak about it from the competitive side of things. This guy doesn't look like he'd be a card that we're going to see in a lot of pro decks, I would say. And a lot of decks you're going to want to bring to a tournament to try to win with. But who knows? I mean, when I see a card like this too, another thing that I think is, okay, what else is coming in this adventure or this expansion that's going to build on what this card is telling me? Because sometimes you see this and it's kind of like just seeing one piece of the puzzle. There's going to be other things that come out later that make this card make more sense, but for right now it just doesn't seem, you know, all that useful. So yeah, we'll see if anything comes out to kind of synergize with it, but for now I don't think it's going to be used a whole lot, at least not in competitive. Let's move on to Firelands Portal. Okay, this is kind of an interesting one. And sorry if I sound a little bit weird, I'm kind of getting over a cold right now. The weather in Korea is insane. But 7 mana, deal 5 damage, summon a random 5-cost minion. So I haven't done the math on this just yet. I haven't, you know, gone through and calculated all the 5-cost minions to see what it could be. But I think it seems a little bit expensive. But I mean, it's expensive because it's strong, of course, right? I mean, 5 damage is enough to remove a lot of the minions that you see in competitive play right now. And to summon a random 5-cost minion as well could be potentially a big board swing. There are some rather highly statted minions at 5 mana, and there's also just kind of just straight up good minions at 5 mana. I think if it was a 6 mana minion, obviously that would be, you know, a lot scarier, but 5 is okay. So, you know, I think it's a card that could see a little bit of experimentation, but I think on a turn that late in the game for most mage decks, you're going to be needing to do more than just 5 damage to one thing, right? So even if it does summon the minion, because in slower mage decks, this card's going to be a little bit too slow, and or I should say in faster mage decks, like in the mid-range, like tempo mage, this card's going to be a bit too slow. And if you look at something like freeze mage, by the time you get into turn 7, you're probably going to need a card that does more than just 5 damage to one thing and summons a minion. The summon a minion thing is kind of negligible. If we're looking at Freeze Mage, it's more about what you can do to control your opponent's side of the board. And at that point in the game, I don't think you'd be wanting to pay rather 7 mana for 5 damage. So I don't think it's going to get used a whole lot, just off the top of my head. But it's an interesting card. We'll see. We'll see. But I don't think it's going to see a lot of play. Moving on to Imp of Malchezaar, 1 for a 1/3, so I like the stats right off the bat. Demon, of course, it's a Warlock card. Whenever you discard a card, draw a card. So for a long time now, since beta basically, since the original vanilla set, we saw Warlock cards that are, you know, powerful effects or powerful minions in exchange for discarding cards. You know, Doomguard's a prime example of that, a 5/7 for 5 mana, which is great, and it has charge, but you also discard 2 cards. But this is a way where you can kind of refill your hand. You still lose the cards, but you get cards back right away. So what can this do, right? This can make sure that you still have things to play the next turn, even if you are playing cards that make you discard. You still might end up losing something very good. It won't always be good. And it also cycles through your deck very quickly. This card, to a certain extent, reminds me a little bit of a Fel Reaver, in that you're going to be trading power for discarding, right? So presumably, if you're playing Imp of Malchezaar, you're playing a deck that's very discard minion or discard spell heavy. And the idea is that you play a lot of really powerful stuff, and the stuff you discard is just replaced, and so you can kind of keep the pressure on, you can keep the tempo up, but you can kind of burn yourself out really quickly too. So I think it's a card that's interesting, and a card that I want to experiment with a little bit. The like Suicide Zoo, Suicide Warlock decks have always been kind of fun to play, so we'll see how he fits in there. As far as competitive decks go, you know, maybe you could see like a really aggressive Warlock deck that uses this, but then again, it's only 2 cards, right? And you're going to need more than just this guy to synergize with discarding if you're going to build a deck around it. So I think it's a good component in that, but it's not the only thing that's going to enable it. So I think it's going to probably see some experimentation in some ladder decks, but probably not a whole lot of use in competitive play right off the bat. So we'll see. Moving on to Ivory Knight, 6 mana for a 4/4, so kind of expensive mana for the power. Battle Cry, discover a spell, restore health equal to your hero, or restore health to your hero equal to the cost. So this is going to be an interesting card to track, because it's a card that's very tempting right off the bat, right? Because it's discover a spell. We know that the discover mechanic in general is kind of weighted towards your own class spells. So, and well, I mean, it's discover spells. It's going to be your class spells. You're not going to get spells from other classes, right, with this. So that's silly. So of course it's going to be paladin spells. The issue there is that the vast majority of paladin spells are pretty cheap, especially if you think about the huge number of 1-mana secrets, and then you have like Blessing of Wisdom and stuff like that too. So you have a really good chance of having 1-cost stuff. And the fact that you have Discover maybe might mitigate that a little bit, because you get a 1 in 3 chance to have a higher number, basically. But it still could be good through just the Discover effect alone, right? I mean, you could use it to grab a Consecrate when you need it, or Hammer of Wrath, or, you know, a Secret at the right time, or like Avenging Wrath or something. So the heal might actually end up being secondary to the fact that this card might let you grab a spell at a crucial time. So I think it's definitely going to see some experimentation. I could see it used in some slower paladin decks, you know, maybe that would help out. But again, you know, where most of the spells you're going to be discovering are low cost, the heal side of it probably isn't going to be too great. But I'm curious about it. I'm really curious to see what people are going to come up with. I'm not too interested in playing around with it myself, but I'm sure a lot of people are. So I'm sure we'll see. Moving on to kind of an exciting hunter card. 2 mana for a 1/1, Kindly Grandmother. Death Rattle, summon a 3/2 Big Bad Wolf. As somebody, I just gotta say it too, like, as somebody whose favorite raid in World of Warcraft is Karazhan, it's kind of fun to see these cards coming into the game right now, because the Opera encounter in Karazhan, where you had a chance of 1 in 3 different plays, essentially, that the raid took part in as far as the boss fight went, is really cool to see it kind of come into a card game. And the Big Bad Wolf one was really fun, because somebody in the raid got turned into Little Red Riding Hood, and you had to like run away and like kite the wolf while the raid tried to burn it down. It was fun. But anyway, as far as Hearthstone goes, this is going to be a card I think that Hunter's going to definitely want to play around with. It's understated for the mana initially. You only get a 1/1 for 2 mana. But it's a 1/1 that your opponent is going to have to be very careful about killing, because of course when he does, it's going to bring out this 3/2 beast. And the Big Bad Wolf is also a beast. So more hunter synergy there, I suppose. So I think it adds an interesting kind of component to options that hunters can choose from in terms of aggressive hunter decks, mid-range hunter decks, in that it's a card that really makes your opponent kind of have to make some difficult decisions about how they want to deal with your board. So I think it's cool, and I don't think it's going to be an auto-include really in mid-range Hunter right off the bat, but I think it's going to be another option that people can look at, which is cool. It's always neat to have these different tech options depending on what you want to get into, but the interesting thing is that Hunter is starting to see a lot of really strong Death Rattle minions in that it's really hard to clear Hunter's board, and that's always been the Achilles heel of something like Warrior. You know, some of the strong Warrior decks that we've been seeing lately are going to have an even harder time, you know, dealing with this kind of card. So it's definitely going to see some use, probably almost certainly going to see some competitive use, and I think it's just, in general, it's another great option for mid-range Hunter to look at. So let's move on to Raving Grimoire. I believe that's how you pronounce that. Raving Grimoire. Raging. See, I've got like Warrior on the brain right now, apparently. Raving Grimoire. 1 for 1/1. Add a random mage spell to your hand. So it's kind of like a mini Ethereal Conjurer. The fact that you can get an extra card in your hand on turn 1 potentially is pretty cool. And it also contests a lot of the early drops from other classes. You can take a shield off an Argent Squire. You can just have a 1/1 out to deal with something that a Zoo Warlock might be playing. It is just nice to kind of get that 1/1 on the board on turn 1 and also add a spell to your hand. So I think it's a card that's certainly going to see some use. Any card that gives you good stats for the mana, and 1/1 for 1, perfectly fine stats for the mana, and it gives you more cards in your hand is going to be something that's, I think, worth checking out. So you know, and mage spells in general are just really good. So yeah, I think it's definitely going to see some use. I could see this possibly thrown into the Tempo Yogg Mage. You know, maybe it's worth experimenting around with for sure. I think it's a good card. So we'll have to see what people come up with that. The Curator in Karazhan was, oh, what was it? Like the 4th boss, I think it was in Karazhan. It's been a long time. But this guy I remember being like the first real like gear check fight, in that you needed your raid to be of a certain gear level to be able to take this guy down, because he was huge and he had a lot of hit points, and he was hard to beat initially. So it's cool to see him in card form now. 7 mana for a 4/6, so expensive for the stats. There is that. He has Taunt, which is nice, and he has a Battle Cry, draw a Beast, Dragon, and Murloc from your deck. So I think in slower decks, this guy is definitely going to be an option to consider, because if you look at slower stuff, like a dragon-wise, Ysera is really good. Alexstrasza is a dragon you find in slow decks. You know, there's other stuff too, I suppose, like Twilight Drake, I guess. But I think generally slower decks are going to benefit the most from this card in terms of the dragons. Beast stuff, maybe not quite as useful, although I guess, well, grabbing a Stampeding Kodo would be useful, because that's like a beast that's in a lot of slower decks right now. And Murloc, I don't know. I mean, Murloc, it's not really going to give you a huge benefit there, I think. If you're playing a slower deck, you're probably not running Finley. So as far as Murlocs go, I mean, unless you're running like a burn, you know, like a Mill Rogue, and you want to grab a Cold Light Oracle or something maybe. But I think the fact that it draws a Beast and a Dragon is good, just as a way to like get that Ysera, get that Alexstrasza in your hand, and also maybe a Stampeding Kodo, or you know, if you're playing, I don't know. I'm trying to think of another beast that would be useful to pull in your hand, but nothing's really coming up off the top of my head as far as like slower control kind of decks. But it's a card that seems good, you know, and we'll see what else comes out in this little set. But I feel like the fact that he has Taunt really kind of pushes him over the edge from meh to like, all right, this could be pretty good, because the fact that he has Taunt helps you mitigate the more expensive mana cost, because it's a card that will let you extend the game, which is what you want to do if you're playing a more control, kind of slow sort of deck. So if he didn't have Taunt, I wouldn't be too impressed with this card, but the fact that it does, I think, pushes it a little bit over the line into the, yeah, I think this guy can see some use maybe. So we'll see. Moving on to Barnes, the kind of the maestro of the Opera event, if I remember right. 4 mana for a 3/4, so it's a pretty standard stats for mana ratio there at the 4 mana cost. Battle Cry, summon a 1/1 copy of a random minion in your deck. And that's actually pretty exciting, because if you think about it, there's going to be ways to abuse this. If you can play, just off the top of my head, if you can play like a really aggressively drawing spell power deck that runs like Malagos or something. So you have like this guy and Malagos in your deck. Those are the two minions you have. So you know what you're going to copy. And the neat thing is that it doesn't take it out of your deck. It just makes a copy of it. So you can still draw that later, but this might be a way to sort of get some of those combos rolling a little bit earlier. So I am kind of curious to see how people are going to use this. A slower spell-heavy deck with like Emperor Thaurissan is going to benefit from this too, because even having one turn of cost reduction is worth it, even if the 1/1 dies right away, which it immediately will, of course. But you're going to want to combo this with something that's going to benefit from what you're bringing out immediately. So something like Emperor Thaurissan, Malagos. If you're looking at slower Paladin decks, like bring out a 1/1 Tyrion Fordring, that's great. You know, I mean, you get a 1/1 taunt with Divine Shield, whatever. It's a little bit harder to remove, but you get that Ashbringer, and so you're going to get yourself Ashbringer twice, maybe 3 times if you're running N'Zoth. And if you're running N'Zoth and this, you can also potentially get 2 Tyrions back because you lose the 1/1, and then you play the regular one, and then you play N'Zoth, and so you get 2 Tyrions back from that. So I think this is a card that could definitely see some use in some slower N'Zoth decks, because again, if he's bringing out a 1/1 Sylvanas or a 1/1 Cairn, I mean, this is all good. So honestly, I think this card's probably going to see a good amount of use. I think it's going to jump right into some Death Rattle N'Zoth decks pretty quickly. And then a little bit later, as people sort of figure out the correct ratios, probably into some more combo spell-heavy decks too, like you know, Malagos Warlock or something. So yeah, we'll see. It's a good card though. It's neat. I think it's definitely going to see some use. And we're back to the beginning. So there you go. Just a quick first impressions on the cards that have been revealed so far for One Night in Karazhan. And I'm going to be doing more videos like this. Maybe not like a video every single time a card is revealed, but maybe once every few days, once a week or something like that. I'll put my thoughts out there. As always, follow me on Twitter at ggDoA, and let me know what you think in the comments about my opinions on these cards. I want to hear your opinions too. So let me know. All right. Thanks for watching, guys, and see you on the next video.